Chapter 29. The Fait Is Not Accompli. On July 16 the Russian ambassador in Vienna cabled his government, "Information reaches me that the Austro-Hungarian government at the conclusion of the inquiry intends to make certain demands on Belgrade. It would seem to me desirable that at the present moment, before a final decision on the matter, the Vienna cabinet should be informed how Russia would react to the fact of Austria's presenting demands to Serbia such as would be unacceptable to the dignity of that state." This, and similar intimations of Austrian designs, disturbed Russia's foreign minister. But Vienna's ambassador hastened to reassure. He told the Russian foreign minister that Austria-Hungary wanted peace. So Russia did nothing. On July 18, Pašić, the Prime Minister of Serbia, cabled Serbian missions abroad, other than in Vienna, that he was determined not to accept any demands by Austria-Hungary that would infringe on Serbian sovereignty. The hidden plot that the Austrian and German leaders were in the process of executing was outlined clearly, but in confidence, for the government of Bavaria at the time. The Kingdom of Bavaria was the largest and most populous state in the Prussian-led German Empire. In joining Germany, it had reserved a larger measure of sovereign independence than any of the other constituent states, including a separate diplomatic service, military administration, and postal, telegraph, and railway services. On July 18, Hans Schön, a Bavarian diplomat who had been briefed by officials in Berlin, explained at length to his Prime Minister, Count Georg Herding, the dual monarchy's pretense of being peacefully inclined and why an Austrian ultimatum could not be delivered to Belgrade until mid-July. Summarizing the demands that would be made in the ultimatum, Schön observed, "It is perfectly plain that Serbia cannot accept any such demands, which are incompatible with her dignity as a sovereign state. Thus the result would be war. That is, there would be war if Vienna actually went through with the plan." Jago and Zimmermann, respectively number 1 and 2 ranking officials at the German Foreign Office, had their doubts. They made the statement that Austria-Hungary, thanks to her indecision and her desultoriness, had really become the sick man of Europe as Turkey had once been. A powerful and successful move against Serbia, Zimmermann had continued, would bring the dual monarchy back from the brink. Schön reported that German leaders are of the opinion that Austria is face to face with an hour of fate. That, they told Schön, was why on July the 5th to the 6th they had given the Austrians a blank power of full authority even at the risk of war with Russia. In their view the Austrians were surprised by such unconditional support, and might have felt more comfortable if they had been told instead to restrain themselves. Germany, Schön made clear, wished that Vienna had not waited so long before doing anything. The Germans were awaiting presentation of the Austrian ultimatum to Serbia. Berlin then would embark upon a diplomatic effort to localize the conflict. All powers should stay out of it, the Germans were going to say, leaving Austria-Hungary and Serbia to work things out for themselves. The Germans were going to claim they knew as little as everyone else of the ultimatum the Austrians would present. They would say it came as a complete surprise, while the Kaiser and others were on vacation. Schön concluded, the attitude of Russia will, above all else, determine the question whether the attempt to localize the war will succeed. German official opinion, as reported by him, was to the effect that war would not be acceptable to either France or England. The Germans, in other words, still believed that Vienna and Berlin could carry through their plot successfully without causing a European war. They thought that they were going to get away with it. This was confirmed by the Berlin representative of Saxony, another of the German states. One expects a localization of the conflict since England is absolutely peaceable and France as well as Russia likewise do not feel inclined towards war. As the great web of deception was being woven to its conclusion, in Vienna and Berlin, the dual monarchy's ultimatum was being drafted behind closed doors. The Austro-Hungarian Foreign Ministry began work on the document on July 10. The Germans were kept informed of its progress. The note was ready to be circulated internally on July 19. Since Tisa's change of heart on July 14, there had been no doubt as to the purpose which the note to Serbia was meant to serve. It was being drafted in such a way as to be rejected. The German ambassador in Vienna reported to his government that the note is being composed so that the possibility of its being accepted is practically excluded. Another official of the German embassy followed up with the report of a conversation with the Austro-Hungarian foreign minister. Count Berchtold appeared to hope that Serbia would not agree to the Austro-Hungarian demands, as a mere diplomatic victory would put the country here again in a stagnant mood. Hoyos at the Dual Monarchies Foreign Office told a German colleague that the demands were really of such a nature that no nation that still possessed self-respect and dignity could possibly accept them. The ultimatum in its final form was submitted to the Council of Ministers, the Cabinet, on Sunday afternoon, July 19. In the words of the historian Frederic Morton, the ministers arrived at Berchtold's palatial private residence for their meeting in taxis and private automobiles. The cars arrived at intervals, avoiding a dramatic convergence. The scene seemed to point to some weekend social gathering. A passerby, had he cared to notice, would not have spotted a single official limousine. It was no accident. Participants had been ordered to arrive in unmarked cars. At the meeting, the council ratified the ultimatum to Serbia. The following day a courier brought it to the elderly emperor, Franz Joseph, in his country palace. Franz Joseph read and approved it. At the same time, the text was cabled to the Habsburg envoy in Belgrade, who was scheduled to present it to the Serbian government on the prearranged date. On a motion from Berchtold, the council had unanimously agreed that the note should be presented to the Royal Serbian government on 3 July at 5 in the afternoon so that, by its 48-hour terms, the ultimatum would expire July 25 at 5 p.m. In turn, Austro-Hungarian mobilization of the armed forces could be decreed and published overnight Saturday/Sunday July the 25th to the 26th. Berchtold had told his colleagues that he was opposed to any further delays. For one thing, news of Austria's intentions had leaked in Rome, endangering the element of surprise. Moreover, Berlin was beginning to get nervous. Nervousness perhaps understated the case. For Germany's civilian leaders, Bethmann and Jago, Austria was proving to be a disappointment and indeed was depriving them of a brilliant victory. The Habsburg Empire was supposed to have crushed Serbia by now, before the rest of Europe had time to react or respond. The assault was supposed to have taken place. The fait was supposed to have been accompli. Yet none of that had been done or even was about to be done. As of July 19, the Austrians were starting, for the first time, to draw a set of demands to be sent to Serbia. The document then had to be delivered and Serbia's response awaited. So it was too late now to launch the surprise invasion Bethmann had envisaged. As soon as the countries of Europe saw the sort of ultimatum Berchtold proposed to deliver, they would be alerted. They would know that Serbia was likely to refuse, Austria was likely to go to war, and Germany might well back Austria. The element of surprise would be lost. One phase in the Austro-German plan to punish Serbia was over, the invasion plan formulated July 6 and never tried. Until July 19 it had meant that Austria would be allowed to crush Serbia with no interference from the European powers because it would have been accomplished before the powers had time to react. Now, after July 19, it had to be changed because it was too late to carry it out as originally planned. In the original scheme, Austria's invasion was to have been completed before the rest of Europe could do anything but send complaining notes after the fact. In the new conception, Europe would have time to react and respond, but would be persuaded to hold off until it was too late. Localization was the key word the Germans would continue to use. It meant that the great powers, though fully conscious of what was about to transpire, would choose not to intervene on the grounds that it was none of their business. Germany undertook to persuade them that they should let Austria and Serbia resolve their differences by themselves. Clearly speed was required of the Austrians here too, because the longer they took in crushing their smaller neighbor, the more likely it was that one of Serbia's patrons, Russia or France in particular, might begin to think in terms of stopping the unequal conflict. July 19th. The Austrian ultimatum to Serbia was put into its final form. The phase of Austrian and German thinking in which all was going to be decided by a swift attack was over. From July 19 on, the German-speaking allies would move forward in full view. Germany shifted into phase 2, localization, in its new sense. In this phase, Germany would let the other European powers know in advance that there would be a war. The ultimatum having been formulated, the German government moved immediately to warn the other great powers to stay out of the fight that was about to begin while, unconvincingly, disclaiming knowledge of why a fight was about to occur or why the great powers might be tempted to intervene in it. Jago placed a note on July 19 in a quasi-official publication, the North German Gazette, advising the others that the settlement of differences which may arise between Austria-Hungary and Serbia should remain localized. This was the start of a diplomatic campaign launched by the German government on behalf of its new tactical goal, conscious localization. When the French ambassador in Berlin asked Jago as to the contents of the Austrian note, Jago assured him that he knew nothing about it. Understandably, the ambassador was astonished. How could Jago not know? But of course he did. Fuller statements of the German case for localization were sent on July 21 to Russia, Britain, and France. Vienna, for its part, gave its ambassadors to major countries full statements of the Austro-Hungarian position. Germany's continued insistence that it knew nothing of what Austria-Hungary planned to do or to demand met with widespread disbelief in Europe's capital cities. Analyzing Jago's pleas for localization, a British official told Sir Edward Grey, "We do not know the facts. The German government clearly do know. They know what the Austrian government is going to demand, and I think we may say with some assurance that they have expressed approval of those demands and promised support should dangerous complications ensue." But the official was confident that the German government do not believe that there is any real danger of war. According to one source, the official was Sir Horace Rumbold at the Berlin embassy, according to another, Sir Eyre Crowe at the Foreign Office. However, in an interview on September 17, 1916, with American journalist William Bullitt, he admitted that he had seen the ultimatum before it was sent. And Zimmermann, Jago's number 2, told a colleague, August 11, 1917, that it is true that we received the Serbian ultimatum about 12 hours before it was presented. Zimmermann wrote that it was pointless to keep on lying about it, since it cannot be kept secret forever. The Austrian ambassador in Berlin brought a copy of the ultimatum in final form to Jago, who later lied and denied having seen it before it went out. Jago rechecked calculations and discovered that the Austrians planned to present the ultimatum an hour too soon, while the French leaders were still in Russia. A panicked effort by Habsburg officialdom, alerted by Jago, resulted in moving that ultimatum time to an hour later. Obeying orders, Germany's military leaders remained ostentatiously on vacation, leaving everything to Chancellor Bateman Hollweg, and to the chief officials of the Foreign Office, Jago and Zimmermann, who outwardly affected, as best they could, an air of unconcern. But they awaited events with different hopes, fears, and expectations. Only a month or so before, Moltke, the gloomy and pessimistic chief of the General Staff, had asked Jago to provoke a world war soon, while Germany still could win it. In 2 or 3 years, according to Moltke, it would be too late. Now Moltke seemingly was prepared to accept the limited but brilliant victory that an Austrian attack would bring, if indeed Vienna would summon up the nerve to proceed with Batemann's plan and pull it off. If, however, the German leaders, military and civilian alike, were wrong in their estimate that the war could be localized, and that Russia would stay out, Then, unlike the Kaiser and the civilians, Moltke would be happy, maybe even happier, with that result too. Bateman, whose role was to preside over affairs while the Austrians carried his strategy into execution, was worried from the start. An action against Serbia can lead to a world war, he told his confidant Kurt Rietzler on July 7. He feared that whatever the outcome, such a war would turn everything that exists upside down. The risk of bringing about a global conflict with unforeseeable consequences was a leap in the dark. Yet Bateman felt that Germany had no choice. The portrait that he painted of his country's international position showed a dark and even paranoid vision, with dangers exaggerated. In his own words, it was a shattering picture. As he saw it, Germany was completely paralyzed, and its rivals, the allied powers of Russia, France and Britain, knew it. The future belongs to Russia, which is growing and is becoming an ever-increasing nightmare to us. Even the dual monarchy would ally with Russia in order to go with the winner. Germany would be alone and helpless in the world of international politics. The Chancellor was unnerved by intelligence reports that had reached him about secret naval talks between Britain and Russia. According to German sources, these might have envisaged an amphibious operation in which British forces brought by sea would land in northeastern Germany. In the memoirs of British Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey, by then Viscount Grey of Falladon, written a bit more than a decade later, the talks were inconsequential. They were undertaken at the request of the French in order to reassure the Russians. So talks were held. No joint operations were planned, no commitments made. What did occur, it would seem, was an exchange of information. Russia was aware that Britain and France had held naval conversations, in the course of which each had disclosed to the other the dispositions they intended to make of their fleets in the event of war. Each was free to change those planned dispositions. The Russians now wanted to be treated on a par with the other two countries, to be full allies. When Britain held talks with France, Russia wanted to hold such talks too. The Russians told the French of their desire. On May 13, Asquith's cabinet had authorized holding such conversations. The ranking serving officer of the British fleet, Admiral Prince Louis of Battenberg, came over to Paris to meet with the Russians some weeks later. Further talks were contemplated, but were obviated by the outbreak of war. The news leaked out. Questions were asked in Parliament. In reply, Sir Edward Grey reiterated an earlier statement by the Prime Minister that if war arose between European powers, there were no unpublished agreements which would restrict or hamper the freedom of the government, or of Parliament, to decide whether or not Great Britain should participate in a war. As Grey writes in his memoirs, the answer given is absolutely true. The criticism to which it is open is, that it did not answer the question put to me. That is undeniable. But, argues Grey, government officials do not habitually make full public disclosure of confidential documents regarding their armed forces. According to Grey, the Russians overstated the importance of the conversations Britain held with the French. His information was that 3 secret letters from Russian sources were obtained by the German authorities. These letters suggested that Grey had withheld material information. Given Grey's character and his reputation for truthfulness, if these intercepted letters had been accurate, his lack of candor as seen through skeptical German eyes must have been a source of genuine alarm. For whatever reason, the Germans worried greatly about those talks. For all of its dangers, the strategy of striking Serbia so quickly as to produce a fait accompli, in the view of Bateman, its author, was the only plausible road out of a situation in which the other great powers might turn against Germany and Austria. And this strategy had not been employed. The Austrians had not even tried it. The Chancellor, according to his confidant, brooded. He reflected on the mistakes Germany had made in foreign policy since the dismissal of Bismarck. Germany had alienated Russia, France and Britain, making enemies of all of them without weakening any of them. In England, the Foreign Secretary professed optimism about the Austro-Serbian dispute. Sir Edward Grey was perhaps the only member of the cabinet who had reason to realize early on that the Balkan situation was serious. He had been alerted by the strongly pro-British German ambassador in London, Prince Lichnowsky. As early as July 6, Lichnowsky warned Grey that Austria would take a hard line on the Sarajevo matter, and would have Germany's blessing and backing in doing so. Grey considered working with Germany to restrain Austria. Later, he urged Austria and Russia to hold talks to resolve their differences. Grey did not display any great concern, the Foreign Office showed less. As reported by the German ambassador in London, Grey believed that a peaceful solution would be reached. He urged moderation, and stressed the importance of Austria proving that the accusations made against Serbia were true. Britain, too, was in the grip of passions at home, occasioned by the question of what to do with Ireland. The British remained oblivious to danger from abroad. External threats seemed to be evaporating. The spring and summer of 1914 were marked in Europe by an exceptional tranquility. Winston Churchill, England's civilian chief of the Navy Department, later remembered. The 39-year-old boy wonder of English politics was an activist, even an adventurous, First Lord of the Admiralty, yet he looked ahead to calm waters. Churchill was not then the imposing figure whom the later 20th century revered. He had risen far and fast in politics, but was regarded as something of an upstart by his cabinet colleagues, almost all of whom were a decade or more older. He seemed always to be in the headlines and in the limelight. His energy was boundless, enough to exhaust those around him, and even in the cabinet he would never stop talking. He was enthusiastic to the point of childishness. Yet his gifts were undeniable. Even then, it could be seen that he had talent, only decades later would it be seen that he also had genius. In 1914 he was applying his abilities to the seemingly hopeless question of Ireland. As he later wrote, the strange calm of the European situation contrasted with the rising fury of party conflict at home. As it became clear that Home Rule for Ireland would finally be enacted, Liberals and Conservatives became caught up in the blood feud of their respective clients, the Catholics of the south of Ireland and the Protestants of the north, the Ulstermen. Both sides recruited and trained paramilitary formations. Ulster purchased arms in quantity from Germany, and war equipment for rival militias was reported to be illegally imported from abroad. Overwhelmed by events, London ordered troop reinforcements and naval support. Understandably, the military commanders, seeing themselves confronted with what might be the opening movements in a civil war, began to study plans of a much more serious character. The complication was that the officer corps in the British Army was disproportionately drawn from Protestant Ulster, and it could be speculated that the army, at least in part, might back Northern Ireland, and the Unionist Party against Asquith's Liberal government. These shocking events caused an explosion of unparalleled fury in Parliament and shook the state to its foundations, writes Churchill. We cannot read the debates that continued at intervals through April, May, and June, without wondering that our parliamentary institutions were strong enough to survive the passions by which they were convulsed. Was it astonishing that German agents reported and German statesmen believed that England was paralyzed by faction and drifting into civil war, and need not be taken into account as a factor in the European situation? On July 20, King George V convened an all-party conference to assemble at Buckingham Palace the following day. On the 21st he opened the meeting with a brief statement. He pointed to the dangers that had led him to convene the conference. The trend, King George said, has been surely and steadily toward an appeal to force, and today the cry of civil war is on the lips of the most responsible and sober-minded of my people. He appealed to the party leaders to arrive at some peaceful compromise. The conference did indeed show the differences to be narrow, but they remained intractable nonetheless. The conference broke down, and the conferees disbanded Friday morning, July 24th. According to the Prime Minister, King George came in, rather emotion, and said in 2 sentences, "Farewell, I am sorry, and I thank you." That afternoon, cabinet members assembled and went back to work on a proposed definition of the border between Home Rule Ireland and British Northern Ireland. When they had finished their deliberations, Sir Edward Grey turned their attention to the Serbian crisis.